A farmer helps a lost tourist with a flat tire on a quiet road. 2 days later, an 18-wheeler full of supplies pulls into his farm, and what happens next stuns everyone. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. John Markham was not a man of grand gestures or big city illusions. He'd spent his entire life tending his family's farm in Eden's Hollow, a quiet stretch of land where golden fields swayed beneath an endless sky. Each day was the same. Feed the livestock at dawn, check the irrigation lines at noon, and mend fences by sundown. Yet one breezy summer afternoon, fate decided to test his routine. Late that day, a sputtering sedan appeared on the dusty road that bordered John's fields. From the porch, he squinted to see a stranger wrestling with a tire iron, the rear wheel clearly flat. John exhaled, set aside his coffee cup, and walked out to greet the newcomer. As he approached, he noticed the driver, a young woman with bright eyes, sweat beading on her brow, trying in vain to remove a stubborn lug nut. She looked up, relief washing over her face. "Looks like you could use an extra hand," John said, kneeling beside the wheel. The woman introduced herself as Mara Jessup, a travel writer passing through on her way to the next town. Her car had blown a tire miles from the nearest service station, and her cell phone couldn't get a signal. John nodded sympathetically and motioned for her to step back. In one swift movement, he pried the lug nut loose, replaced the flat with his spare, and tested the seal. Mara was stunned by his kindness. She offered money, but John shook his head. He insisted it was no trouble, joking that a good deed might be all the excitement he'd get that week. Grateful and a bit flustered, Mara asked if she could repay him another way. John suggested she write a fair review of Eden's Hollow if she ever passed through again. She laughed, promised she would, and then, noticing the late hour, accepted his invitation to stay for supper. That evening, the farmhouse came alive with conversation. Over steaming plates of roast chicken and fresh vegetables, Mara shared tales of her travels. She described bustling cities, weaving pictures of places John had only imagined. In turn, John spoke about the generational legacy of his farm, how his grandparents had tilled the soil with their bare hands. Outside, the crickets chimed as if to punctuate each story. Mara marveled at the simple beauty of the countryside, promising she'd return soon. The next morning, Mara departed early, leaving John with a grateful smile and a wave. He figured that was the last he'd see of her, but he felt a quiet satisfaction at having helped someone in need. 2 days drifted by uneventfully, and John returned to his usual chores. He didn't give the encounter much further thought until, on the third day, a colossal 18-wheeler rumbled onto the farm, sending dust clouds swirling and rattling the windows of his modest ranch house. Startled by the commotion, John hurried outside. The truck bore no familiar logos, just a plain white trailer shimmering in the midday sun. Its driver, a lanky man in a faded cap, hopped down from the cabin. He approached John with a broad grin and tipped his hat. "Got a delivery for Mr. Markham?" he announced, his voice echoing across the open yard. John blinked in confusion. He hadn't ordered anything, certainly not a rig that size. "You sure you got the right address?" The driver nodded and handed over a clipboard. On it was a shipping manifest listing pallets of canned food, first aid kits, seeds, fertilizer, and even a brand new generator. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a note. "For the man who reminded me that kindness still exists. Regards, Mara." John felt his throat tighten. These supplies were worth a small fortune, resources that could sustain the farm for months and even help the broader community. He stared at the list, astonished. "You want me to unload it here or in your barn?" the driver asked, oblivious to John's shock. John regained his composure and directed the man to a covered storage area behind the main building. Word spread fast around Eden's Hollow. Neighbors soon arrived to witness the spectacle. They gawked at the truck, speculating how John had come into wealth. Some teased him. asking if he'd won the lottery overnight. John just shook his head, trying to process Mara's generosity. That afternoon, as the supplies were carefully stacked, John found a letter tucked between the pallets. In it, Mara explained she'd kept her promise to write about Eden's Hollow. A charitable foundation sponsored her travels, and she had connections with donors eager to support rural communities. When she told them about a modest farmer who had shown her kindness without asking anything in return, they insisted on sending help. The letter ended with a simple request: pay it forward in your own way. Standing under a bright sky, John reread those words until they blurred. Pay it forward. He glanced around at the crates of non-perishable food and medical supplies. The orchard next door belonged to his longtime friend Mabel, who was struggling after a late frost destroyed much of her crop. Another neighbor, the Chen family, had been scraping by since a tornado damaged their barn last spring. Many in Eden's Hollow needed a helping hand, just as Mara had once needed his. That same evening, John loaded his old pickup with boxes of canned goods and took them to Mabel's orchard. She gasped when she saw the bounty, tears springing to her eyes. He simply said, "We look out for each other, right?" Next, he drove to the Chen's place with enough fertilizer to rejuvenate their soil and a promise to help rebuild their barn. Each delivery brought fresh waves of gratitude and disbelief. By nightfall, John felt an odd but welcome warmth in his chest. Word of John's generosity spread beyond Eden's Hollow. Local reporters showed up, hoping to capture a feel-good story. John, ever humble, told them the real hero was someone named Mara, who believed in paying kindness forward. Meanwhile, his neighbors formed an impromptu volunteer group. Using the new generator, they set up a communal freezer for storing produce, ensuring nothing went to waste. The medical kits were distributed to elderly residents in need. A sense of unity blossomed across the once quiet farmland. On the 5th day after the truck's arrival, John received a call at dawn. It was Mara, her voice bright through the crackly line. She apologized for the surprise, but said she hoped he understood why she did it. John, still a bit overwhelmed, simply thanked her. She asked if he would send her updates on how the supplies were used. "I want to include it in my article," she explained. "People need to see what a simple act of kindness can spark." After that conversation, John realized the weight of Mara's request. He began documenting every improvement, snapping photos of Mabel's thriving orchard, the Chen barn repairs, and the new communal freezer. Slowly, Eden's Hollow transformed. Even folks who'd long lived in isolation started helping each other. Disagreements were resolved with calm talk instead of resentment. As John wandered the fields at dusk, he reflected on how a single flat tire had led to all this. Sometimes, he thought, fate works in mysterious ways. In the weeks that followed, a gentle shift occurred in the hearts of everyone around. John's modest generosity became a beacon, reminding people that sometimes the simplest gestures carry the greatest impact. When local families faced hardships, they knew they could turn to their neighbors. And whenever John spotted a stranger on the road, be it a lost traveler or someone with a broken wheel, he remembered Mara's example. Because in Eden's Hollow, one act of kindness had sown the seeds of a brighter tomorrow. At sunrise, John Markham stepped out onto his porch with a fresh sense of purpose. The events of the last few weeks still felt almost unreal, a sudden tide of generosity that had washed over Eden's Hollow and left it renewed. He couldn't help but reflect on Mara, the traveler who had turned his world upside down simply by needing a hand with a tire. Yet as he sipped his coffee, John realized that the real challenge was only beginning. Despite the bounty of supplies delivered by that 18-wheeler, John knew distribution alone wasn't enough. He had glimpsed the possibility of a more resilient Eden's Hollow, one that could endure hardships for decades to come. Each new conversation revealed more potential. Mabel's orchard was already thriving with the help of fertilizer, and Mr. Chen's barn repairs had inspired half a dozen locals to form a rotating group that tackled small jobs on neighboring farms. But deeper issues still lingered beneath this newfound optimism. For instance, talk had circulated about a proposed highway extension that would cut dangerously close to the farmland. If approved, it might bring heavy traffic and push property taxes sky high. Many older residents fretted they wouldn't be able to afford the changes. Already, letters from out-of-town developers had begun appearing, eyeing the region for convenience stores and fuel stations. John also worried about the shifting climate that seemed to intensify storms. Even with new seeds and gear, a single rough season could devastate the progress. That morning, he drove his old pickup into town. He'd volunteered to speak at a small community meeting in the refurbished library. As he navigated the familiar dirt roads, he passed farmland transformed by late summer sunshine. Fields of barley shimmered in gold, and the orchard trees bent under the weight of fresh fruit. Everywhere he looked, he noticed subtle improvements: replaced fences, new irrigation channels, bright coats of paint on old barns. Pride warmed his chest, but he sensed a hum of unspoken worry. At the library, a circle of metal folding chairs was arranged near the windows. Farmers, shop owners, and teachers gathered, each wearing a hopeful but uncertain expression. John took a seat beside Mabel, who gave him a grateful smile. Across the circle sat the Chen family, along with a local teacher named Andrea and several others. A low hum of chatter died down when the town's de facto moderator, a retired school principal named Mr. Whitfield, tapped a gavel gently on his lap. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady. "We've seen Eden's Hollow experience a remarkable turn of events lately, thanks in large part to John's generosity and that mysterious traveler's donation. But now, we need to figure out how to make this unity last." A murmur of agreement passed through the group. Mabel cleared her throat. "I've been able to hire 2 helpers for the orchard this season, and it feels like we can finally get ahead. But what about next year?" John folded his hands, quietly thinking of the best way to respond. He knew folks admired him for distributing supplies, but he also recognized that a single windfall wouldn't solve everything long term. "We can keep pooling resources," he said softly, scanning the faces around him. "The seeds, equipment, and medical kits won't last forever. If we invest in better roads or a cooperative system, maybe we can sustain what we've started." A hush followed. They all understood that forging a plan required bigger steps. Andrea, the teacher, stood up. "I've had parents asking how to expand their children's opportunities. If the highway extension happens, new jobs might come, but so might higher costs. We need to handle growth without losing who we are." Heads nodded in agreement. The mood in the room remained thoughtful yet tense. Mr. Chen, who was always pragmatic, said, "One approach is to form a formal cooperative. We can share profits, plan expansions responsibly, and speak with one voice against outside pressures." This idea sparked lively discussion. Some residents worried about bureaucracy or losing autonomy. Others saw a co-op as a lifeline that would protect farmland from aggressive development. John suggested they invite experts or neighbors from nearby counties who had set up similar models. They could learn from established cooperatives and adapt what worked for Eden's Hollow. By the time the meeting ended, no final decision was made, but a sense of direction began to take root. Afterward, John mingled with the attendees. He overheard Mabel expressing her relief to Andrea that she no longer felt alone in her orchard work. Meanwhile, the Chens chatted with a local trucking company operator about distributing produce beyond county limits. John stepped outside for fresh air, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Leading a revolution of small-town resilience was a far cry from fixing a simple, flat tire. He was in deeper than he ever imagined, but backing away wasn't an option. That evening, as John returned to the farm, he found a postcard in his mailbox. The handwriting looked familiar, Mara's neat script. On the front was a photograph of rolling green hills, and on the back, a brief message. "Heard you're doing amazing things. Keep me updated. I'm drafting an article about Eden's Hollow and the ripple of kindness that followed. With gratitude, Mara." John smiled, touched by her continued interest. Slipping the card into his pocket, he resolved to send her a reply soon. He realized that if Mara was writing about Eden's Hollow, the town might soon draw broader attention. On one hand, this could bring resources. On the other, it could open the floodgates to speculation and outside investment. John took a slow walk around the property, watching the sky fade from orange to purple. When he reached the old barn, he paused, running his hand along the weathered boards. This farm had been in his family for 3 generations. Could it survive the changes ahead? That night, he hardly slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw images of bulldozers and neon signs overshadowing fields, or corporate trucks dominating the roads. The next morning, he rose early, deciding to seek counsel from one of the region's oldest and most respected farmers, Mrs. Carter. At 85, she was no stranger to adversity. He found her at dawn, gently harvesting eggs from her henhouse. She looked frail, but her gaze was sharp when he explained his worries. "Son," she said, leaning on her cane, "my father used to say, 'The land gives you what you give it.' You've been feeding folks, giving them hope. That'll come back around. But you can't cling to the past so tight you miss out on a better tomorrow. If new roads or businesses help the next generation stay here, maybe that's a blessing. Just make sure the people making decisions actually care about this land." Her words echoed in John's mind long after he left. By the time John returned to the farmhouse, Mabel and Mr. Chen were waiting on the porch. Both bore cautious smiles. Mabel spoke first, explaining that they'd made calls to a regional farming co-op in the next county. They invited representatives to come by for a talk the following week. Mr. Chen chimed in, suggesting that if the meeting went well, Eden's Hollow might formalize a co-op charter. John felt gratitude surge within him, reminding him of the day that Truck arrived. As the day of the co-op meeting approached, John discovered that Eden's Hollow felt almost like a beehive in spring. Everywhere he went, neighbors discussed the potential benefits and pitfalls of joining forces. Mabel, who rarely left her orchard, was spotted at the local diner, comparing notes on fruit distribution with a retired trucker named Wallace. Mr. Chen found himself invited to give a short talk at the elementary school about farm economics, while Andrea, the teacher, called a special assembly to remind her students how their own families' livelihoods depended on the land. This flurry of activity reminded John of planting season, where every action held the potential to shape what sprouted later. On a bright Tuesday morning, a pair of representatives from the regional farming cooperative rolled into town. They were both middle-aged men dressed in practical work clothes, each wearing easy smiles that hinted at a lifetime spent among fields and livestock. Their names were Eric and Martin, and after stabling their pickup near the town library, they walked around to shake hands with anyone curious enough to approach. Word spread quickly of their arrival, and soon a casual gathering formed out by the library steps. John approached them with a firm handshake. "Thanks for coming all this way," he said, noticing how both men carried thick folders and small notepads. "We're grateful for any advice you can share." Eric nodded, explaining that they had helped form a cooperative in their county 10 years earlier. Over time, they'd unified dozens of family farms under one umbrella for resource sharing, collective bargaining, and local branding. Martin chimed in, adding that while a co-op had hurdles to overcome, the benefits, fairer prices, shared machinery, even pooled insurance, were worth the effort. That afternoon, the representatives led an open Q&A session in the church's meeting hall. The crowd spilled into the hallway, with many forced to stand by the back wall. John sat in the front row, taking notes on a worn legal pad. Mabel raised her hand first, asking about orchard-specific concerns. Martin responded patiently, that cooperatives often allocated specialized funds to help fruit growers store produce efficiently. This lessened waste, gave them better negotiating power, and fostered shared research on best growing methods. A rancher named Hector worried about losing control. If I join, do I still get to decide what I plant and when? Eric reassured him that autonomy remained vital. Each member could run their fields as they pleased, so long as they upheld the cooperative's core agreements. The crowd murmured in approval. Next, Mrs. Carter, the oldest farmer in the region, inquired about how co-ops handled conflicts. Eric shrugged with a good-natured grin. We rely on mediation. Sometimes folks butt heads, but that's life. Better to talk it through than let tensions fester. Each question prompted lively debate. Andrea, representing the school's perspective, wondered if a co-op could partner with local education. Martin described scholarship programs that sometimes sprouted from co-op profits, enabling farm kids to study agriculture, technology, or business. The entire room buzzed with excitement, an energy that made John's pulse quicken. He realized that for the first time, Eden's Hollow was seeing beyond immediate struggles toward a broader vision for its future. After the meeting, John invited Eric and Martin to tour his farm. Driving slowly along the dusty roads, John explained how Eden's Hollow had rallied after that mysterious donation from Mara. Eric, leaning forward in the passenger seat, peered out at the healthy crops. Whoever she is, her gesture allowed you folks to dream bigger. But a co-op will help you stay strong for the long haul. Relying on one-time help is risky. John nodded, reflecting on how easy it might be to become complacent once free supplies arrived. A structured system could hold them together if times turned bad again. They arrived at John's farmhouse in the golden haze of late afternoon. Martin admired the newly stacked crates by the barn and asked how the community had decided to distribute everything. When John explained how each neighbor simply stepped in to claim what they needed, sharing as required, Martin whistled in approval. That generosity you've shown each other is the backbone of a co-op, he said. With that mindset, you're already halfway there. While Eric and Martin walked the rows of corn and barley, John noticed Mabel approaching from across the field, basket in hand. She offered the men some of her orchard's best peaches, face glowing with pride. I never thought I'd see the day I'd have enough to share with outside visitors, she confessed. Usually it's all I can do to keep them from rotting on the branch. But this year, it's different. Her voice hitched with emotion. John smiled warmly, recalling how only a month ago she feared losing the orchard outright. By nightfall, everyone reconvened at the farmhouse for a casual dinner, where Mabel's peaches became a luscious dessert. They ate on the porch using makeshift tables and chairs, while fireflies blinked across the yard. Despite the joy, John also felt an undercurrent of tension. He'd heard from Wallace earlier that day. Rumors indicated the county council might soon schedule a vote on the proposed highway extension. If that road came through, farmland might become prime real estate for chain stores or tourist stops. The possibility weighed on John's mind as he sipped iced tea. What's bothering you? Martin asked gently, reading the concern in John's eyes. John explained the predicament. An influx of outside investment could balloon land prices, push out smaller farmers, and transform Eden's Hollow from a tight-knit community into a pass-through zone. Martin listened intently. Well, he said after a pause, co-ops can help block unethical developers by purchasing land collectively or negotiating zoning laws. But it's a fight. Your county council must see that farmland preservation is more valuable than another gas station or strip mall. Eric agreed. The co-op can become a strong political voice. You'd be recognized as a unified entity capable of speaking for all members. John nodded, appreciating the candor. He realized that forging a cooperative was about more than mutual profit. It was about safeguarding a way of life that could vanish if no one stood up for it. As night settled, conversation drifted to simpler topics. Favorite harvest memories, Stories of storms long past, until Eric and Martin, yawning, retired to a guest room while Mabel returned to her orchard. The next morning, a hush lingered over the farm. John woke early, stepping outside to find Eric already drinking coffee on the porch. "Your place reminds me of my granddad's farm," Eric remarked wistfully, looking across the fields as the rising sun painted everything in pink and gold. "There's a purity to it." John felt a swell of gratitude for the land he called home. The notion of losing its tranquility made him realize how high the stakes were. When Martin joined them, they sketched out a rough blueprint for Eden's Hollow's prospective co-op. First, they'd need an organizing committee to handle legal registration. Next, they'd create membership rules, contribution rates, and a plan for distributing any co-op revenue. John jotted details in a notebook, determined to present them at the next town assembly. "It'll be a lot of paperwork, though," Martin warned, half smiling. "You'll need a lawyer, maybe an accountant, and you've got to be ready for endless questions." John chuckled, recalling how the community had displayed no shortage of questions the day before. Still, this felt like the best path forward. As they wrapped up, Mabel arrived to collect Eric and Martin for a final orchard tour before their return trip. John had errands to run in town, so he bid them goodbye, promising to keep the process moving. They parted with hearty handshakes and broad smiles, leaving John buoyed by fresh determination. On the way to Eden's Hollow's modest downtown, John replayed Eric's words about farmland preservation. Something about the phrase lit a spark in him. A co-op wouldn't just ensure stable crop sales or fairer prices. It could give the entire valley a collective identity, a voice strong enough to protect them from the worst aspects of progress. Upon reaching Main Street, he spotted Andrea stepping out of the bakery, arms full of pastries for her students. John waved her over, explaining Eric and Martin's blueprint. Her eyes lit up. "This is what we've needed," she said. "A real plan. Let me help. The school staff can assist with printing forms, maybe even organizing a fundraiser for any legal fees." John agreed, thankful that so many hands were eager to pitch in. He carried on to the hardware store, where Mr. Chen was picking up nails and fresh lumber. There, John mentioned the co-op plan again. Chen nodded, saying he'd gather a list of potential members right away. Within an hour, word spread down the length of Main Street. Returning home that afternoon, John found himself oddly energized. He realized that, for the first time since that 18-wheeler came barreling in, he felt in control of the future rather than swept up by it. He rummaged for stationery, sat at his desk, and composed a long letter to Mara. He wrote about the co-op idea, the orchard's improvements, and the subtle changes that were making Eden's Hollow more than just a small blip on the map. At the end, he confessed something he hadn't told anyone else, that her kindness had sparked not just a sense of gratitude, but a sense of purpose he'd never before known. As he folded the letter into an envelope, John paused to look out the window. The fields gleamed, the sky stretched wide, and a breeze whispered through the old oaks lining the driveway. He remembered Mara's words in her postcard, how a single act of kindness could become a ripple that spread outward in unexpected ways. Soon the town would face development threats, complicated votes, and the bureaucratic slog of forming an official cooperative. But John felt prepared. They weren't alone, and they had the land itself urging them onward. He sealed the envelope, imagining Mara's reaction when she read every detail of how Eden's Hollow was blossoming. Perhaps she'd smile, or maybe she'd shed a tear of joy. Either way, John hoped she would see that her gift kept on giving, pushing an entire community to rally for a better tomorrow. Stepping outside, he walked to the mailbox and raised the little red flag, a simple gesture that felt like a final promise. In Eden's Hollow, it was no longer just about surviving. They were learning how to thrive, together. Days passed in a flurry of activity as Eden's Hollow prepared to launch its new cooperative. In nearly every home, folks talked about bylaws and membership fees between sips of morning coffee. At the diner, once only a place to grab a quick meal, neighbors huddled over booths to sort out meeting schedules and volunteer roles. For some, this level of organization felt foreign. After all, the town had always operated informally, with small agreements sealed by handshakes. But John Markham saw excitement kindling in everyone's eyes, a shared belief that Eden's Hollow could define its own future. One afternoon, Andrea gathered a group of volunteers in the school gym. They set up folding tables lined with sign-up sheets, large charts, and name tags. Anyone interested in the co-op could drop by to learn about potential roles, distribution, record-keeping, outreach, or conflict resolution. John arrived early with Mr. Chen, each carrying a crate of freshly harvested fruits and vegetables to serve as refreshments. The vibrant display represented the best that the local fields could offer, a real reminder of why everyone was coming together. Soon, the gym filled. A hum of voices rose as farmers compared harvest notes and small business owners discussed how the co-op might help them reach new customers. Some, like Old Man Wallace, remained skeptical, squinting at the sign-up forms as though each line were a trap. But when John quietly approached to explain how cooperatives had worked in other towns, Wallace nodded in slow acceptance. "I'll give it a shot," he said, "long as we don't end up tangling in too much red tape." It was progress, and John counted it as a small victory. Mabel, ever gracious, began distributing slices of peach cobbler while Andrea took the microphone at the front. "Thank you all for coming," she greeted, her clear voice cutting through the chatter. "We've got a lot to cover today, drafting bylaws, electing interim officers, and forming committees." Some groans answered her, but they were good-natured. Mabel leaned toward John and whispered, "I never thought I'd see half the town so intent on forming committees." He suppressed a grin, remembering just weeks ago how suspicious everyone was of any formal structure. They started with the basics. Membership would be open to anyone producing or selling goods within Eden's Hollow. Each member would pay a small fee to cover administrative costs. In return, they'd gain collective bargaining power and a say in major decisions. Next came the matter of officers. The crowd insisted that John run for co-op president, his face turning red at the suggestion. When he tried to protest, Mabel patted his shoulder. "You're already our leader in practice," she said, a warm smile lighting her features. "Might as well accept it officially." Despite nerves fluttering in his gut, John agreed. Mr. Chen volunteered as treasurer, given his business background. Andrea would serve as secretary, ensuring that every decision was documented. The rest of the group hammered out details on committees for education, land use, and resource management. By late afternoon, they had a working framework. The Eden's Hollow Community Cooperative, set to be formally registered once they found a lawyer to finalize the paperwork. Applause erupted across the gym when Andrea pronounced the results. More than one onlooker wiped away tears. In the midst of this jubilance, the door creaked open. Everyone quieted, turning to see who stood there. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp suit stepped inside, flanked by two associates in dress shirts. His slicked-back hair and polished shoes looked out of place in the modest school gym. He cleared his throat. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Bryce Montgomery, representing the Redwood Development Group. I was told this meeting might concern property planning in Eden's Hollow." The hush that followed was deafening. Andrea, swallowing visibly, tried to regain composure. "Sir, this is a private community meeting," she explained. "We weren't expecting outside visitors." Montgomery offered a disarming smile. "Completely understood. We're in the area researching the proposed highway extension. My firm wanted to explore how we can collaborate with local stakeholders. We heard talk of a cooperative forming here and thought we'd introduce ourselves." His cordial tone dripped with the smoothness of an experienced salesman. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some recognized Redwood Development Group's name from rumor or news articles about big box expansions in other towns. John stepped forward, wearing a polite but guarded expression. "I'm John Markham. We're just setting up a local co-op. If you have questions, maybe we can schedule a separate session." Montgomery nodded. "Of course, we'd love to set up a discussion. Redwood Group wants to ensure the new highway brings opportunities, not threats, to places like Eden's Hollow." Mr. Chen approached with a measured step. "We're concerned about farmland preservation and stable property taxes," he said, meeting Montgomery's gaze. "Historically, big projects cause displacement. Are you prepared to address that?" Montgomery's associates shifted slightly as if uneasy about direct questions, but Montgomery kept his composure. "We believe in balanced growth," he replied smoothly. "I'd be happy to share Redwood's development approach. Let's keep the lines of communication open. After all, we all want Eden's Hollow to thrive." Despite the carefully chosen words, the visitor's presence cast a shadow over the meeting. People eventually resumed chatting among themselves, but the excited mood had dimmed. Andrea politely wrapped up the session, directing those who wanted to sign membership forms to do so before leaving. Meanwhile, Montgomery and his associates wandered around, exchanging business cards with curious townspeople. John noticed Wallace glancing at a glossy Redwood brochure and shaking his head. Mabel lingered by John's side, pressing her lips together in concern. "Well," she muttered, "this complicates things. We knew they'd come around sooner or later." John nodded, shoulders tense. "We'll have to be even more unified now," he said quietly. "If Redwood tries to buy a property or push certain zoning changes, a strong co-op voice might be the only counter." Mabel gave his arm a reassuring pat. "We're all behind you, John. This is our home. We won't let it be swallowed up by corporate ambition." As the crowd filed out, Bryce Montgomery gave John a courteous nod. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Markham," he said, slipping a card into John's hand. The edge of the card was embossed with Redwood's sleek logo. John forced a polite smile, pocketing it without further comment. He already sensed Montgomery was no ordinary salesman. Redwood must have scouted the area, anticipating how best to secure land near the impending highway. John inhaled slowly, reminding himself that the co-op gave them leverage they didn't have before. The next morning, John awakened earlier than usual, mind restless from the prior evening's encounter. After a quick breakfast, he drove out to see Mrs. Carter. He found her hobbling through her chicken coop with determined steps, collecting eggs. "Heard you had a visitor from Redwood," she said, frowning as John relayed the details. "I worried about something like this. The highway extension's a magnet for developers." John helped her gather feed, appreciating her counsel. "They say they want to collaborate, but I doubt it's purely altruistic," he confessed. Mrs. Carter scoffed. "Son, a fox can smile at you and say it wants a peaceful night in the henhouse, but you know better. Redwood's out to make a profit, not preserve farmland." She paused, setting the feed bucket down. "That co-op you're forming might be our best shield. Don't let them divide the community with fancy promises." John nodded, lips set in a grim line. He gave her a gentle hug before leaving, carrying her words like a mantra. By the time John returned to his fields, fresh determination coursed through him. He spent the rest of that day drafting a letter to the county council, officially announcing the Eden's Hollow Community Cooperative's formation and requesting a voice in any land use hearings. Andrea had promised to refine the wording. Meanwhile, Mabel, Mr. Chen, and others spread the news about Redwood's visit, warning neighbors to be cautious if approached with unsolicited offers to buy property. Tension simmered throughout the hollow. Several days later, John's mailbox held an envelope with Redwood's logo. Inside was a polite letter from Bryce Montgomery, reiterating Redwood's desire to explore mutually beneficial partnerships. They proposed a meeting the following week at the local diner. "Bring whomever you deem appropriate," the letter read. "We look forward to discussing how Redwood can integrate seamlessly with Eden's Hollow's emerging business environment. The polished language made John's stomach churn. Redwood was moving quickly, but he resolved to meet them face to face, co-op members at his side. That evening, at a small co-op committee gathering in John's living room, he laid out Redwood's invitation. Each person voiced concerns. Some, like Wallace, believed Redwood might offer good money to landowners looking to retire. Others dreaded farmland turning into a chain of convenience stores. Andrea pointed out that Redwood might attempt to buy out individuals who were on the fence, undermining co-op unity. Mr. Chen stressed the importance of attending the meeting together with a clear stance. Finally, they agreed on a plan. The co-op's core team, John, Andrea, Mr. Chen, Mabel, and whoever else felt strongly, would sit down with Redwood. They'd listen, ask tough questions, and make no commitments. Afterward, they'd return to the community with any proposals Redwood pitched, ensuring transparency. John, glancing around at the earnest faces, felt a swell of pride. This was democracy at its roots, neighbors gathering to protect their shared heritage. As everyone left that night, John lingered by the porch, watching the stars prick through a velvet sky. A gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and distant blossoms. Once he might have seen Eden's Hollow as an isolated farmland, existing quietly at the edge of the world. Now he realized how far-reaching its future had become. From Mara's generous donation to the formation of a cooperative, from Redwood's arrival to county politics, everything converged around a single question. Could a small farming community hold on to its soul when corporate forces came knocking? John closed his eyes, recalling Mrs. Carter's blunt advice. In a sense, Redwood was that fox at the henhouse door, all polished grin and promises of synergy. But Eden's Hollow wasn't helpless. They had each other, the co-op, and the resolve to remain stewards of the land. With that thought, John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, and he would face them with the quiet strength of the place he'd always called home. When the appointed day came for Redwood's meeting at the local diner, a light drizzle turned the dirt roads slick and the sky dull gray. Despite the weather, nearly everyone from Eden's Hollow was eager to attend. In fact, the diner had never seen so many vehicles crowd its gravel lot. John arrived first with Andrea and Mr. Chen, scanning the parking area for Redwood's trademark black SUV. The tension in his stomach reminded him of the anxious moments before a harvest, uncertainty about what the day might yield. Bryce Montgomery and his two associates appeared right on time, stepping out of the SUV with umbrella in hand. They wore their usual business attire, crisp shirts and confident expressions. The diner's neon sign flickered overhead as they strode in. John and the co-op leaders greeted them politely, though no one could deny the chill in the air. The Redwood men took a corner booth, leaving an open circle of chairs around the rest of the tables for the locals. Waitresses bustled, placing coffee cups and water pitchers. A hush fell once Montgomery began speaking. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," he said, voice measured and calm. "We understand the Eden's Hollow Community Cooperative is formalizing. Redwood Development Group hopes to work with you as the new highway moves forward. We'd like to present some ideas." A few nods rippled across the room. Wallace remained standing at the back, arms folded over his chest, watchful. Mabel sat near John, shoulders squared, determined to hold Redwood accountable. Montgomery's associate, a bespectacled man named Donnelly, produced a slim binder. He opened it to reveal glossy maps, color-coded to show proposed highway routes, commercial building zones, and what he termed opportunity areas. The binder was passed around. As it landed in front of John, he saw an overlay of farmland labeled with corporate logos, a potential gas station here, a large retail chain there. Whole sections of existing cropland were reimagined as parking lots and multi-lane intersections. He suppressed a grimace and passed the binder onward. "We believe," Montgomery continued, "that Redwood can bring both immediate investment and long-term prosperity to Eden's Hollow. Imagine better roads, more jobs, and improved tax revenues for the community. With the highway, travelers and tourists will drive through regularly, patronizing local shops and fueling growth. We want the co-op to be a partner in this expansion. Perhaps there could be Redwood-sponsored produce markets or brand collaborations that let you sell more effectively. Mr. Chen spoke up, clearing his throat. And how would Redwood's vision impact property values or local taxes? Most of us worry that older residents could be taxed out of their homes. Montgomery's second associate, a woman named Talia, answered, "We plan to advocate for phased assessments. Redwood understands the need to mitigate sudden tax hikes. We'd also offer buyout options to farmers who prefer to retire or relocate. Our goal is balanced development, not displacement." Andrea exchanged a glance with John. Balanced development might sound good, but many of us have seen how these expansions play out in other towns. Corner shops and family farms get overshadowed by big-box stores. Do you have concrete assurances that Redwood would preserve farmland and local culture? Montgomery offered a polished smile. Our record speaks for itself. We have successful projects in several states, and if we can form a public-private partnership with your co-op, we'd structure protective covenants, ensuring farmland remains integral. Redwood is not about paving over every acre. At that, Mabel couldn't hold back. But these maps already show so many lots earmarked for commercial use. We can't feed future generations on empty lots and parking spaces. Our orchard, our fields, once they're gone forever. A low rumble of approval came from the other locals. Wallace, still at the back, muttered, "Amen," under his breath. Montgomery raised his hands in a gesture of calm. "We understand your worries. This is why we want dialogue. Redwood is committed to listening." In the quiet that followed, John decided it was time for directness. Let's suppose the county approves the highway extension. If Redwood invests, how do we stop outside speculators from snatching up small parcels near the new ramps for chain stores or warehouses? Montgomery nodded, acknowledging the concern. "One strategy," he offered, "is to let Redwood coordinate site acquisition. Then we can uphold a code that respects local input. Random speculators won't stand a chance if Redwood and the co-op set guidelines together." It sounded almost too tidy, like a fisherman promising a net that only caught the right fish. John pressed further. "And if Redwood changes its mind, or sells the property, once you've rezoned it? We've seen that happen in other places." Donnelly adjusted his glasses. "We believe in forging real partnerships, not short-term flips. Our legal counsel can craft binding agreements. The co-op would have partial oversight." The proposals hovered, intangible yet alluring. A waitress refilled coffee cups, her gaze darting between Redwood's suits and the anxious farmers. Gradually, a ripple of side conversations rose. No one from Eden's Hollow seemed comfortable with Redwood's pitch, yet some recognized potential benefits. Redwood's men, for their part, maintained calm smiles, handing out business cards and referencing success stories. John felt a swirl of conflicting thoughts. Redwood offered money, infrastructure, possibly even the chance to modernize local commerce. But the cost might be the town's heart and soul. He recalled Mrs. Carter's warning about foxes and henhouses. Sensing it was time, Andrea tapped a spoon against her glass. The chatter subsided. "We've heard Redwood's proposals," she said, voice steady. "What you're suggesting has big implications. We'll need time to discuss among ourselves and check references of your existing projects. Frankly, we're not ready to sign or even outline a formal partnership today." John nodded. Mabel, Mr. Chen, and Wallace all voiced agreement. Redwood's trio exchanged glances, then Montgomery inclined his head with mild disappointment. "Of course, we appreciate your diligence," Donnelly added. "We'd like to follow up soon. Perhaps a week from now, if that suits your schedules." Without committing, John responded diplomatically, "We'll let you know. We want to do this democratically." The Redwood team, reading the room, rose to their feet. Montgomery placed a business card on the table. "Here's our direct line. We hope you'll think about Redwood's offer." With that, they exited into the drizzle, leaving the diner in tense silence. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Wallace's voice rumbled from the back. "I don't trust those fellas as far as I can throw 'em." A wave of quiet laughter rippled through the group, cutting the tension. Andrea sighed. "They're clearly slick, but they do have resources. The question is, do we need them, and on whose terms?" Mabel said softly, "We can't just bury our heads in the sand. That highway's likely coming, Redwood or not. The co-op might need leverage." John, leaning on the counter, found everyone's eyes turning to him. He felt the weight of responsibility like a bale of hay on his shoulders. "Let's gather all the information we can," he said. "We'll contact those towns Redwood mentioned, see if their developments were truly beneficial, and we'll keep forging our co-op. The stronger we are, the less we'll depend on Redwood." Several heads nodded. With that, the group dispersed into the drizzle, returning to chores and errands weighed down by fresh worries. That evening, John typed out an email to Eric and Martin, the co-op advisors from the neighboring county. He detailed Redwood's approach and asked if they'd heard similar stories. He also planned a trip with Mabel and Mr. Chen to a nearby county rumored to have faced a Redwood project years ago. Before bed, John reread the letter from Mara in which she praised the town's resilience. He wondered what she might say about Redwood's arrival. In her travels, she must have witnessed how unstoppable modernization could seem. Perhaps she'd counsel them to hold fast to their principles. As the day closed, John stood on his porch in the fading twilight, the drizzle now reduced to a soft patter. He pictured Redwood's glossy maps, acres of farmland labeled future development or high-value commercial. It was as if they saw only empty space, ignoring the sweat and memories that had nurtured those fields for generations. A pang of protectiveness rose within him. Yes, progress might be inevitable, but maybe, just maybe, Eden's Hollow could steer it in a way that preserved its heart. He went to bed with the rain tapping his windows, imagining how Redwood must be meticulously charting their next move. A company that size wouldn't give up easily. They'd keep presenting deals and forging alliances, hoping to fracture local unity. But John's faith in the co-op had only grown stronger that day. Indeed, Redwood's presence had proven how important it was for Eden's Hollow to band together. Before drifting to sleep, he silently prayed that unity would hold. The following morning dawned bright and clear, the storm clouds chased away by a bracing breeze. John rose early, checking the livestock and walking the perimeter of his fields. The soil, dark and moist, gleamed with promise. Sometimes after the storm, farmland looked as though it was reborn. He felt the same about the town. Yes, they were facing powerful forces, but adversity might just sow seeds of greater strength. With that in mind, John readied himself for another day of phone calls, visits, and planning sessions, determined to keep Eden's Hollow flourishing on its own terms. He had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy. Redwood's approach was too smooth, their resources too vast for them to retreat quietly. Yet the diner meeting had shown something equally clear. Eden's Hollow folk had no intention of folding. They might not be polished or wealthy, but they possessed a fierce loyalty to the land and each other. As John made his way back to the farmhouse, he thought again of Mara's single act of kindness, how it had inspired a chain reaction leading them to this crossroads. At least now, nobody in Eden's Hollow would face the future alone. Over the next few days, John and several members of the cooperative threw themselves into research about Redwood. Phone calls flew back and forth between counties. Andrea dug up newspaper archives, finding articles detailing Redwood's previous expansions. Mr. Chen scoured online forums for stories shared by business owners in places where Redwood had established a foothold. Mabel spoke with orchardists near the state line, learning how they'd managed when a big developer set up large retail centers nearby. By the time the co-op gathered again in the school's gym, they had compiled a thick sheaf of notes that painted a complicated picture. Redwood sometimes fulfilled promises of infrastructure and growth, but in other instances, farmland was indeed paved over for highways and chain stores. The pattern suggested Redwood's approach adapted, depending on local resistance and how profitable the land deals were. Andrea began the meeting by distributing summaries of their findings. The hush was profound as people read about farms that had prospered under Redwood's business synergy and others that had been swallowed up. For some communities, Redwood had built roads and improved distribution channels, letting local farmers access bigger markets. Yet in other places, Redwood focused on commercial sites, pushing out small producers who couldn't match the rising property taxes. Once everyone absorbed the documentation, anxiety rippled across the gym. Eden's Hollow could fall on either side of that equation, depending on how Redwood chose to play its cards. "This is exactly why we formed the co-op," John reminded them gently. "We can't just bar the gates. The highway is coming, and Redwood is poised to shape it. We need to present a unified stance: farmland protection, equitable taxes, and local input at every step." He paused, scanning the circle of serious faces. "If Redwood won't agree, we'll fight them however we can. But if they'll respect our terms, maybe we can benefit while preserving the land." His words were met with quiet nods and a few relieved exhalations. Mabel pointed out that Redwood's next meeting request was still on the table. They'd reached out again, reminding the co-op to set a date for further talks. When the co-op members turned to John, asking what he proposed, he admitted they might consider drafting a preliminary agreement to test Redwood's sincerity. It could outline farmland easements, property tax protections, and a guarantee that Redwood would not buy land behind anyone's back. "We'll be direct," John said. "No secret deals with individual owners. If Redwood wants to purchase farmland, they must do so openly, with the co-op's oversight, and under a strict set of conditions." To everyone's surprise, Wallace, one of the older, more skeptical farmers, spoke up. "That's about as fair as it gets," he grunted. "If Redwood hates the idea, we'll know their talk of cooperation is just hot air." With that plan, the co-op decided to schedule a second meeting with Redwood. They gave themselves 3 days to hammer out a short but firm letter of intent, a list of non-negotiable points. Andrea volunteered to type it up on official letterhead once they had the bullet points. Mrs. Carter, who sat by Mabel's side, recommended they add a clause requiring Redwood to fund agricultural education in local schools if they wanted naming rights for any new facilities. If they put up signs or sponsor local fairs, she insisted, they should give back to the community, not just flash their logo. Some members chuckled, but many saw the wisdom in her suggestion. Redwood wanted good PR after all. The co-op might as well leverage that desire. While these preparations unfolded, John continued his everyday farm duties. He rose at dawn to check the irrigation lines and harvest early summer produce. A local trucker, newly committed to the co-op, arrived each afternoon to load crates of vegetables for distribution beyond the county line. Meanwhile, John's mind churned with the complexities of Redwood's looming presence. In quiet moments, he found himself pausing by fence posts or under orchard trees, remembering the day Mara had arrived. From such a small seed of kindness, an entire movement had sprouted. But he wondered if this newest challenge would overwhelm them all. One late afternoon, John caught sight of an unfamiliar car rolling up his driveway. He tensed, half expecting Redwood to appear with unannounced overtures. Instead, a man with salt and pepper hair climbed out. He introduced himself as Lloyd Bennett, an attorney from the next county. "I heard you folks might need legal help finalizing your co-op," Lloyd said, doffing his hat politely. He explained that Eric and Martin, the co-op advisors John had corresponded with, had recommended him. He specialized in agricultural law and had helped other communities protect farmland from aggressive developers. John exhaled in relief, inviting Lloyd inside for coffee. Over steaming mugs, they discussed the intricacies of drafting protective covenants, cooperative charters, and land use agreements. Lloyd offered to represent the co-op, charging only modest fees while waiving certain costs because he admired what Eden's Hollow was doing. "My grandparents were farmers," he confided, glancing around John's modest living room. "I want to see smaller communities hold on to their identity." John felt a wave of gratitude for the network of goodwill that kept expanding around them. Perhaps Redwood's resources weren't the only formidable force in play. When Lloyd joined the co-op's next strategy session, his presence added a professional edge. He explained how farmland easements could be filed with the county, legally binding future owners to keep the land in agricultural use. He showed them sample clauses that Redwood might balk at, such as requiring long-term environmental stewardship. Each page of legal language felt heavier than a bale of hay, but the co-op understood these details might save them from heartbreak later. By the meeting's end, they had a robust draft of what they now called the Eden's Hollow Preservation and Prosperity Agreement, a mouthful that Andrea insisted they shorten to IRP. In the days that followed, Redwood tried subtly to gauge community opinion. A pair of Redwood staffers visited Mabel's orchard, praising the scenery and dropping hints that Redwood might pay top dollar for land near the orchard's western slope. Mabel politely brushed them off, pointing to the co-op's upcoming negotiations. Meanwhile, a Redwood flyer appeared on the bulletin board at the post office, touting the group's philanthropic track record. Wallace found it a bit heavy-handed, muttering about corporate marketing fluff. But others worried Redwood was warming up for a big PR push. Despite Redwood's attempts, folks stayed firm in their resolve to speak with one voice. Finally, John sent a letter inviting Redwood to a meeting at the old community center, a neutral location larger than the diner. He enclosed the EHPPA draft, specifying that they wanted Redwood's feedback line by line in a public setting where any citizen could attend. Redwood responded within a day, agreeing to the terms. The date was set for a Wednesday evening, about a week away. Instantly, the entire town seemed to brace itself for yet another critical gathering. Redwood's second official visit promised to be more serious and more pivotal than the first. Amid the flurry of co-op organizing, John received a package in the mail. The return address made his heart skip: Mara Jessup. Inside, he found a small journal, its cover embossed with a silhouette of rolling hills. Tucked into the journal was a handwritten note. Mara wrote that she'd completed her travel article featuring Eden's Hollow, describing how an act of kindness led to community transformation. Enclosed were a few typed pages, excerpts from her upcoming piece, soon to be published in a regional magazine with a national affiliate. "Your story is spreading, John," she wrote. "People are inspired by what you're doing. Keep it up." Reading her words, John felt both pride and anxiety. Attention from a broader audience could strengthen their cause, especially if Redwood realized the public was watching. But more publicity might also lure additional speculators, eager to profit from a soon-to-be famous farmland success story. John decided that shining a light on Eden's Hollow was ultimately a good thing. It meant Redwood couldn't operate in the shadows, quietly buying out land from unsuspecting owners. The co-op would operate in the open, with the backing of a sympathetic public. The night before the Redwood negotiation, John scarcely slept. He paced his modest kitchen, mind spinning with potential scenarios. Redwood might refuse the EHPPA outright, claiming it restricted their business freedom. Or they might push for small compromises that could unravel the agreement's protections. He feared they would cherry-pick local farmers desperate for quick cash, turning them against the co-op. But as dawn approached, he reminded himself that Eden's Hollow had come this far by sticking together. If Redwood tried to sow division, it wouldn't be easy. On the morning of the scheduled meeting, John prepared by reviewing each clause in the EHPPA with Lloyd, ensuring the language was clear and unassailable. By afternoon, he walked his fields as a last ritual, checking irrigation lines and feeding livestock, letting the calm routine ground him. The land had weathered so many trials, drought, storms, and now this tug-of-war for its future. In a sense, the farmland was older and stronger than any corporation could fathom. That gave John courage. Finally, as twilight bathed Eden's Hollow in soft orange light, John headed to the community center. Cars and trucks lined the nearby streets, and neighbors greeted each other with subdued nods. This was no longer just about Redwood or the highway. It was about the town's identity, about proving that a humble farming community could stand up to powerful outside interests. John clutched a copy of the APA, shoulders squared. Whether Redwood signed or refused, Eden's Hollow would do its best to shape destiny, rather than yield to it. He slipped inside, meeting Andrea's determined gaze, Mabel's quiet smile, and Mr. Chen's encouraging nod. The Redwood delegates had not yet arrived, but the hush in the hall vibrated with anticipation. Taking his seat at the front, John felt an odd sense of calm. Win or lose, they would face this challenge together, each of them living proof that farmland wasn't just about profit. It was about community, history, and hope. And if Redwood needed a lesson in that truth, Eden's Hollow was ready to provide it. Bryce Montgomery arrived at the community center with perfect punctuality, stepping from his black SUV just as the town clock chimed 6. Flanked by Donnelly and Talia, he cut a confident figure beneath the overhead lights, his polished shoes tapping against the pavement. A hush fell over those gathered outside. While many residents had arrived early to secure seats, a few lingered on the steps, eyeing Redwood's delegation warily. Montgomery offered a cordial nod, but the farmers gave only polite murmurs. Tension crackled in the cooling evening air. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift table at the front. A simple microphone stood ready, wires snaking over the worn hardwood floor. An assortment of homemade posters lined the walls, reminders of Eden's Hollow's history, from vintage photographs of early harvest festivals to collages of 4-H club achievements. Under normal circumstances, these artifacts lent the hall a warm, nostalgic glow. Tonight, however, they felt like silent witnesses to a pivotal confrontation. John sat at the table beside Mr. Chen and Andrea, with Lloyd the attorney close by. Mabel waited in the front row, hands folded in her lap, determination in her eyes. Montgomery and his team filed in, each carrying a slim briefcase. They settled across from the co-op leaders, exchanging clipped greetings. Andrea cleared her throat to gather attention. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "We're here to continue discussions with Redwood Development Group about potential collaboration, and to present the Eden's Hollow Preservation and Prosperity Agreement, or EHPPA. This is an open meeting, so we welcome any resident who wishes to observe or speak." A murmur spread through the crowd, the scraping of chairs echoing as folks shifted forward to listen. Montgomery inclined his head. "Thank you for organizing this, Ms. Liu," he said, using Andrea's last name. "Redwood is eager to find a path that respects your community's values. Let's hear what you propose." His tone was calm, but carried a note of practiced assurance. John noticed how Talia set up her laptop, presumably to take notes and analyze every point. Donnelly, meanwhile, kept his expression neutral, flipping through a stack of documents. Andrea glanced at John, who took a small breath and spoke clearly into the microphone. APPA is designed to protect farmland from speculative buyouts, preserve local culture, and ensure fair economic opportunities if the highway brings more traffic. We're open to Redwood's involvement, but only within the guidelines we've drafted. He motioned for Lloyd, who distributed copies of the EPPA to Redwood's 3 representatives. "If you'd like, we can summarize the major clauses before we dive into details." Montgomery accepted the stapled pages, scanning them quickly. "Yes, please do," he replied with a polite nod. Mr. Chen adjusted his glasses. Clause 1. Redwood must agree that any commercial development on farmland be approved by a co-op vote, ensuring no outside deals occur in secret. Clause 2. Redwood will assist with farmland protection by either funding conservation easements or supporting co-op-held property that remains in agricultural use. Clause 3. Redwood cannot push for rezoning that forces farmland into commercial status without local consent. Clause 4. Redwood will help offset any tax burdens that new projects create for existing landowners. Clause 5. Redwood will sponsor at least one educational or community initiative annually aimed at sustaining local agriculture. Montgomery's brow lifted as he skimmed the text. Talia tapped her keyboard, presumably cataloging each clause. After a moment, Donnelly leaned forward. Some of these points are broad. For instance, how do we quantify no outside deals occur in secret? If a landowner wants to negotiate directly with Redwood, can the co-op forbid that? John felt the crowd bristle, so he kept his voice measured. We're not forbidding private transactions, but Redwood must disclose any land purchase or major plan to the co-op first, so we can ensure it aligns with EHPPA guidelines. We want transparency. Montgomery laced his fingers together. We appreciate the spirit of openness, Mr. Markham, but Redwood typically keeps business negotiations confidential until final contracts are signed. We can't always broadcast every step. Lloyd interjected gently. In a cooperative arrangement, confidentiality can exist alongside transparency, so long as Redwood follows the basic principle that no farmland is rezoned or sold for non-agricultural use without co-op awareness. That's the crux, preserving farmland as farmland, unless the co-op consents. Talia glanced at the next clause. Regarding farmland protection, Redwood is prepared to help with conservation easements, but typically we do so in designated areas. We can't blank check an entire county. Is the co-op willing to identify priority tracts that must remain agricultural? Andrea nodded. Yes. We've mapped them, mostly prime fields and orchard belts. We can show you exactly which regions we regard as non-negotiable. Someone in the crowd murmured approval. Mabel sat straighter, relief easing her shoulders. Donnelly frowned at the clause about tax offsets. Honestly, Redwood can't control county tax assessments. We can lobby for phased assessments, but guaranteeing no tax spikes might be unrealistic. Mr. Chen answered calmly. We understand Redwood can't rewrite tax law, but Redwood can provide a fund to cushion sudden tax hikes on farmland or sponsor a local tax relief program for elderly farmers. This is about Redwood's willingness to protect vulnerable landowners from changes Redwood's development might accelerate. Silence stretched as Redwood's team scribbled notes. At last, Montgomery offered a mild smile. We'll need time to evaluate these terms. Some points, like partial oversight and farmland mapping, are feasible. Others, like guaranteeing no major tax increases, raise red flags. Redwood can't assume indefinite financial responsibility for every potential shift. Still, we want a good relationship with Eden's Hollow, so let's see if we can find middle ground. Andrea leaned in. We do appreciate Redwood's willingness, but Eden's Hollow isn't a commodity to be packaged or overshadowed. These conditions are non-negotiable in principle, though we can fine-tune details. The crowd stirred. Wallace gave a firm nod, as though hearing exactly what he'd hoped for. Redwood's representatives conferred in low tones. Talia typed quickly, Donnelly whispered something about legal viability, and Montgomery finally looked up with a composed face. We propose forming a task force, Redwood appointees and co-op members working side by side. Let's refine EHPPA into a legally binding contract. This might take weeks, possibly months. Meanwhile, Redwood will refrain from land purchases that circumvent the co-op's structure. In return, the co-op acknowledges Redwood's interest in establishing commercial hubs near the future highway interchange, within reason and subject to farmland exemptions. He spread his hands, a gesture of compromise. John scanned the crowd's reaction. Some seemed optimistic that Redwood hadn't outright refused. Others worried Redwood was simply stalling, hoping to wear them down. Lloyd spoke quietly. "That's a start. We can set a formal timeline for drafting. The co-op won't be rushed, and Redwood shouldn't proceed with any deals until we have a final agreement. If Redwood is serious, we can proceed in good faith." A pregnant pause followed, and John sensed the entire hall holding its breath. Finally, Montgomery nodded. "Agreed. Let's tentatively schedule a first session next week. Redwood will bring legal counsel. You'll have Mr. Bennett. We'll set ground rules on how to incorporate these clauses." Andrea exhaled, Mabel squeezed her hands together, and Wallace's tense posture relaxed. A flutter of relief moved through the onlookers. While no signatures were put to paper tonight, Redwood had at least recognized the co-op's stance instead of trying to bulldoze it. Yet John could not shake a hint of apprehension. Redwood was a corporate entity skilled in negotiations, able to twist language to its advantage. Would the co-op's farmland protections hold up under the weight of big money and bigger lawyers? He caught Lloyd's eye, receiving a subtle nod of encouragement. For now, the conversation was a step forward. The meeting wound down, and Redwood's trio politely answered a handful of questions from curious residents. They then departed with professional handshakes, promising to continue the dialogue. After Redwood left, the community center erupted in talk. Folks gathered in small clusters, some praising the co-op's stand, others fretting Redwood's next move. John stepped away from the chatter, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. He slipped outside where the twilight sky had deepened into a canopy of stars. A soft breeze rattled the branches of a nearby oak. Through the window, he could see Mabel hugging Andrea, Mr. Chen scribbling notes with Wallace, and Mrs. Carter recounting the night's events to a younger farmer. This was Eden's Hollow at its best. Unified, strong in the face of uncertainty. Lloyd joined him, removing his glasses to polish them on his sleeve. "Well," the attorney murmured, "that could have gone worse. They didn't slam the door on ERPA, and they're open to a cooperative approach. I'd call it a preliminary success." John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I just worry about Redwood's sincerity," he admitted. "They want to build, and we want to preserve. Seems contradictory. But at least they're not forcing a land grab, yet." Lloyd nodded. "We'll stay vigilant. I'll draft a memo confirming Redwood's promise to hold off on land deals. If they breach that, we have grounds to challenge them. Meanwhile, the co-op can refine the farmland maps. If Redwood sees a clear plan, they might accept boundaries to avoid." John shook Lloyd's hand. "I'm grateful for your guidance," he said simply. "Without a lawyer on our side, Redwood might walk all over us." As the evening wound down, townspeople trickled out in small groups. A few paused to thank John or share words of encouragement. He smiled, mindful of the quiet pride shining in their eyes. It was as though they all realized they had taken a crucial step, choosing the path of negotiation instead of letting Redwood call the shots. In the moment, John remembered Mara's letter. She'd predicted that big challenges would test Eden's Hollow, but the bond formed around generosity might endure. He felt the truth of her words stronger than ever. When the hall finally emptied, John locked up, stepping into the cool night. Fog curled along the ground, and the scent of earth rose from the fields. He gazed over the open land, imagining the shapes of future harvests, picturing orchard rows that might stand for generations if the co-op held firm. The next phase would be rigorous, meetings, legal language, possible standoffs. But Eden's Hollow was no longer naive. Each new day proved that their farmland held more than crops. It held a heritage worth defending. 1 week after the meeting in the community center, Eden's Hollow was awash in cautious optimism mixed with quiet wariness. Each day brought more phone calls and planning sessions as the co-op readied for its first task force gathering with Redwood. Andrea posted notices at the post office and the general store, inviting any resident to submit suggestions for farmland boundaries or future projects. Mabel collected an entire folder's worth of orchard-related ideas, from improved irrigation to a local fruit festival. Even Wallace, who normally grumbled about endless meetings, admitted there was a strange excitement in the air, as if the town were collectively writing its own destiny. Still, John Markham couldn't shake the sense that Redwood might move behind the scenes to sway public opinion. That worry deepened when Andrea called him one morning, breathless. "Have you seen the flyer?" she asked. "The one Redwood just put up near the diner? It's some sort of sponsorship drive. They're offering to fund a new community park if folks support them." John felt a twinge of dismay. Redwood's brochures had a knack for sounding benevolent while advancing their own agenda. He drove straight to the diner, scanning the bulletin board by the entrance. Sure enough, an eye-catching flyer featured Redwood's stylized tree logo and the phrase "building a brighter future together." It promised a generous endowment for a recreational space near the soon-to-be upgraded highway ramp. The fine print hinted Redwood would manage the site, selecting vendors and granting naming rights. John could practically hear Bryce Montgomery's smooth pitch. Redwood, investing in Eden's Hollow for mutual gain. A few locals might be attracted to the idea, recalling how the town had never had the budget for a proper public park. But John saw the subtext. Redwood was trying to curry favor outside the co-op's formal negotiations. John grabbed a copy of the flyer, returned to his pickup, and called Mabel. She sounded frustrated. "This is exactly what we feared," she said. "They're planting seeds of goodwill, hoping some folks will side with Redwood no matter what the co-op says." John assured her they'd address it at the next co-op meeting. He also texted Lloyd, who agreed it was Redwood's right to propose philanthropic gestures, but warned that letting Redwood manage local land without EHPPA safeguards could erode farmland boundaries in the future. Meanwhile, Redwood's promises didn't stop there. Over the next few days, several farmers reported polite phone calls from Redwood representatives. Some were older residents who had never joined the co-op, uncertain about complicated bylaws or monthly fees. Redwood pitched a simple notion: a buyout package that would let them retire comfortably, plus Redwood's guarantee to utilize the land responsibly. This struck John as eerily reminiscent of Redwood's more predatory deals elsewhere, offering large sums to individuals who might not fully grasp the long-term consequences. Mr. Chen tried to reach those residents, explaining the co-op's farmland protections, but a few were tempted by Redwood's quick cash logic. When word spread that two older farmers were seriously considering Redwood's offer, the co-op arranged a friendly visit to their properties. John, Andrea, and Mabel spent an afternoon driving between remote barns, explaining EHPA in plain language. "We're not here to force you," Andrea insisted to one quiet woman, whose fields lay at the edge of the county. "We just want you to have all the information before signing anything." The woman, fiddling with her apron, admitted Redwood's pitch sounded too good, but she was weary of uncertain harvests. She said she'd think it over. John left feeling torn. He understood her worries, but Redwood's quick deals could undermine everything the co-op had built. Amid these concerns, Redwood and the co-op convened the first task force session in the library's reading room, a smaller affair than the public gatherings. 6 people from Eden's Hollow faced off with 4 Redwood delegates, including Montgomery, Donnelly, and a corporate lawyer named Simon. Lloyd sat at the co-op's side, riffling through the EHPPA draft. The setting was quiet, with only the muted hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of pages. They began by reviewing farmland maps. Redwood's side nodded politely as Mabel highlighted orchard zones. Mr. Chen pointed out prime grazing land, and Andrea indicated the acreage needed for future expansions of the local school's agricultural program. Montgomery offered measured praise. "These designations are sensible. Redwood can develop near the highway corridor while respecting these zones. However, We ask for some flexibility around the interchange. It's the most commercially viable location, and this map you've drawn places nearly all that area into farmland conservation." Andrea exchanged a glance with John. "That interchange is close to Mabel's orchard, which we absolutely won't sacrifice for a gas station or warehouse," she said firmly. Montgomery smiled gently. "No one's proposing to demolish a beloved orchard, but we'll need a corridor for travelers, some lodging, maybe a small retail strip, to capture highway traffic." Lloyd stepped in, emphasizing the co-op's stance that Redwood must strictly abide by farmland preservation. "We can add a buffer zone, with orchard land off-limits unless the orchard owner chooses otherwise," he suggested. "Commercial plots can be assigned on the outer edges if absolutely necessary. Redwood invests in infrastructure, obtains its commercial footprint, and farmland remains intact." Donnelly asked about the orchard's irrigation lines, wondering if Redwood could reroute them to accommodate new roads. Mabel stiffened but nodded that she'd consider a reconfiguration if Redwood fully funded any changes and guaranteed no disruption to her orchard's yield. Each point required meticulous discussion, the tension thickening as Redwood gently pushed for concessions. By midday, they'd made partial progress, drafting a conceptual buffer zone around the orchard and farmland. Redwood would get a slice near the future highway ramp, provided it remained under co-op oversight. As they paused for a break, Talia produced more brochures about Redwood's philanthropic efforts, referencing the potential park. "We'd love the co-op's endorsement," she said sweetly. "If you publicly support Redwood's community park, people would see us as partners. That goodwill might help move everything along." John bristled inwardly. Redwood clearly hoped to win hearts before the EHPPA was finalized. He sipped coffee, then politely said it was premature to endorse Redwood's park until the farmland protections were fully hammered out. After the break, Redwood's lawyer Simon shifted the conversation to taxes. He conceded Redwood might sponsor a local tax relief fund, but they wanted an expiration date, perhaps 5 years, after which Redwood wouldn't shoulder additional burdens. The co-op bristled. Mr. Chen argued farmland families shouldn't be left unprotected if property values skyrocketed after Redwood's developments took root. Simon claimed Redwood couldn't assume indefinite liability for a region's entire tax structure. Lloyd proposed a compromise. Redwood would contribute to a special farmland protection fund for a decade, re-evaluated afterward if property values still soared. Redwood balked, but didn't dismiss it outright. As the afternoon light faded, they adjourned without finalizing the agreement. Still, they'd inched forward. Redwood gained some potential flexibility near the interchange, while the co-op insisted farmland remain shielded behind buffer zones. Both sides agreed to meet again in a week. Lloyd, packing up his legal pad, told John outside the library that Redwood's approach was typical. Yield a little ground, press for expansions, see if the co-op would cave. "But you didn't cave," he said, tapping John's shoulder. "It's a good sign." Despite these measured victories, Redwood's park proposal continued to make waves. A few vocal residents welcomed the idea, praising Redwood for addressing a long-time community need. Others suspected Redwood intended to name it Redwood Park, plastering it with corporate signage. In a tense conversation at the diner, Andrea was forced to quell rumors that Redwood's park might swallow farmland, or that Redwood planned to buy the playground itself. "We're nowhere near an agreement," she reminded folks. "Don't rush to thank Redwood until we see a contract that upholds our rules." One evening, as John finished loading farm supplies into his truck, an older man named Harris approached him. Harris, who'd never joined the co-op, was rumored to be listening to Redwood's buyout pitch. He looked uneasy, wringing his hands. "John," he began, "I ain't proud to say this, but Redwood's offering me a sum that'd cover my debts and let me retire. I'm worn out. My knees ache every time I get on a tractor." John nodded sympathetically. "I understand, Harris. Nobody should judge you for wanting a secure retirement." Harris swallowed, tears threatening. "But if I sell, Redwood says they might build near my fields. That could be the start of big changes. I can't decide whether to trust Redwood's promise that they'll keep part of it in farmland. What if it's all talk?" John rested a hand on Harris's shoulder. "I can't make that decision for you. The co-op wants to see farmland remain farmland, but we can't force you to keep going. If you do sell, please consider telling Redwood they must adhere to ICHPA." Harris admitted Redwood's contract didn't mention ICHPA at all. That omission alarmed John. "See if Lloyd can review it," John pleaded. "Don't sign before you know the implications." Harris nodded, looking a bit relieved. He promised to call Lloyd in the morning. That conversation weighed heavily on John as he drove home. Redwood's negotiations with the co-op seemed relatively earnest in official meetings, yet individual buyout offers told a different story. If Redwood quietly acquired farmland piece by piece, soon the co-op's carefully drawn maps would be meaningless. The next morning, John convened a hasty meeting at the orchard with Mabel, Andrea, and Mr. Chen. They agreed the co-op must reach out to every landowner Redwood approached, ensuring no deals bypassed ICHPA. A campaign of phone calls and porch visits began, with co-op volunteers explaining farmland easements and encouraging neighbors to ask for legal advice. Meanwhile, Redwood pressed forward, distributing more brochures about potential park designs and referencing improved roads that would ease produce transport. Andrea grew exasperated, feeling Redwood was playing both sides. "They're praising farmland while negotiating bigger commercial footprints," she said. Mr. Chen observed Redwood's real aim: to shape public opinion so that by the time ICHPA was ready, the town would accept Redwood's terms more readily. John knew they had to remain calm and consistent. "We show them we won't buckle under PR or partial truths," he said. "Our stance is firm. Farmland endures, Redwood invests responsibly, or no deal." With each day, the co-op's unity became more vital. Farmers who once quarreled over boundary lines or crop pricing now set aside differences. People realized Redwood's approach could succeed if they allowed themselves to be divided. Over cups of strong coffee and shared labor in the fields, they found solidarity. For John, it felt both exhausting and profoundly meaningful. This was bigger than him, bigger than a single orchard or a single donation. Mara's spark of kindness had ignited a bonfire of communal resolve, uniting them in an effort that tested their hearts and minds. As the second task force meeting with Redwood approached, the tension in Eden's Hollow reached a slow boil. Conflicting rumors abounded. Redwood might accept the farmland easements, or Redwood might ignore ICHPA and buy up land under a subsidiary's name. The co-op braced for every scenario. One thing was clear: if Redwood had planned to breeze in and pave the countryside without resistance, they'd underestimated Eden's Hollow. And John, though weary, felt more determined than ever to ensure they held their ground. Morning sunlight spilled across John Markham's kitchen table as he reviewed a fresh round of paperwork. It was the day of the second task force meeting with Redwood, and a subtle dread mingled with his coffee's aroma. He flipped through pages that Andrea and Mr. Chen had compiled, evidence of Redwood's ongoing talks with individual farmers, a revised farmland map showing newly contested parcels, and draft language for sections of the Eden's Hollow Preservation and Prosperity Agreement, ICHPA, that still remained unresolved. Each line felt like a battlefield position, every clause a piece of territory the co-op was determined not to lose. John stuffed the papers into a worn briefcase, then stepped outside to find Mabel waiting by her truck, eyes worried but resolved. She'd driven over early, wanting to ride along for moral support. "We can't let Redwood bully us," she said softly, a slight tremor in her voice. John placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll stand firm. Lloyd and Andrea will be there. We're not alone in this." With that, they headed down the dusty road toward the library, where the meeting was set to begin in less than an hour. Along the way, They passed Harris's farm, one of the places Redwood had targeted for a buyout. John noticed a glossy SUV parked near the front gate. He slowed momentarily, exchanging a worried glance with Mabel. "They're relentless," she murmured. John nodded, pressing the gas pedal gently. He hoped Harris would remember their conversation and at least consult Lloyd before signing anything. Still, the sight reminded John that Redwood was waging a quiet campaign parallel to the official task force talks. When they arrived at the library, Lloyd was already outside, conferring with Mr. Chen. A sprinkling of townspeople stood nearby, and Redwood's familiar black SUV had taken a spot in the parking lot. The air held an edge of anticipation, as though everyone felt they were on the cusp of a turning point. John exchanged nods with neighbors before stepping into the reading room where Bryce Montgomery, Donnelly, Talia, and the corporate lawyer Simon were laying out documents. Montgomery gave a courteous smile. "Morning," he greeted, gesturing to a table arranged with chairs on opposite sides. "Shall we get started?" John and Mabel took their seats. Andrea slipped in next to them, and Lloyd unpacked his notes. Mr. Chen lingered near the door, collecting last-minute feedback from a few farmers who'd come to observe. Once everyone was settled, Montgomery clasped his hands. "We made some revisions to address your buffer zone concerns and to propose a phased tax relief plan. Let's see if we can find alignment." They began by discussing Redwood's buffer zone modifications. Talia projected a digital map onto a small portable screen, pointing out bright green areas labeled Protected Farm Zone. Redwood wanted a narrower zone around the orchard belt than the co-op had initially drawn, contending they needed more room for potential retail sites near the highway ramp. Mabel's jaw tightened. "That extra retail zone creeps dangerously close to my orchard. Our orchard lines run deeper than Redwood seems to realize." Donnelly flipped through some papers. "We can't ignore that the prime real estate for commercial use lies along that corridor, but maybe we can shift a bit further back from your main orchard rows." The negotiation turned painstaking as both sides counted acreage, debated irrigation boundaries, and measured distances between proposed road expansions and orchard rows. Mr. Chen weighed in, describing how cutting too close to orchard trees could disrupt root systems and reduce yields. Simon, Redwood's lawyer, questioned whether those yields truly required that much space. Lloyd had to step in, citing agricultural standards for orchard buffer needs. Hours slipped by with little resolution, but Redwood grudgingly agreed to consider leaving orchard lines intact and developing only the outermost edges. Though not final, it was a hint of progress. After a short break, the discussion pivoted to farmland easements and potential buyouts. John cleared his throat. "We're concerned that Redwood is approaching individual owners with offers that ignore each PPA clauses. If Redwood wants farmland, it should be covered by the cooperative framework, transparent negotiations, strict conservation rules." Montgomery shrugged, his tone ever composed. "We can't forbid private citizens from exploring their options. Redwood is simply responding to interest. Some farmers wish to retire, and we have capital to help them do that." Mabel interjected, her voice slightly raised. "But Redwood's offering them contracts that don't even mention farmland preservation. That goes against the spirit of what we're discussing here." Talia typed furiously, capturing the exchange. Donnelly glanced at Montgomery for direction. Montgomery sighed. "In principle, Redwood has no objection to farmland preservation. But it's difficult to impose EHPA conditions on an individual who might not be part of your co-op. We assume the co-op membership was voluntary. Are you trying to make it mandatory for all landowners?" Andrea shook her head. "We're not forcing membership. But if Redwood is truly committed to EPA, you wouldn't bypass it just because someone isn't formally in the co-op. You'd be consistent, right?" The room stilled. Montgomery gave a slow nod, though his eyes flickered. "We can add a clause that Redwood, in good faith, will apply EHPP protections to any farmland purchase in Eden's Hollow, co-op member or not, until the agreement is finalized, but we can't control future owners or unforeseen resale. It wasn't everything the co-op wanted, but it was at least an acknowledgement. Lloyd added a reminder that Redwood should submit all farmland purchase agreements to the co-op for review prior to closing, ensuring they didn't conflict with ERPA. Montgomery hesitated, then said, "All right, but we'll need language stating that such review won't unreasonably block legitimate deals." The conversation stretched on, involving disclaimers, timelines, and potential arbitration procedures. By the time they'd hammered out a rough compromise, everyone looked mentally drained. The final segment of the day revolved around Redwood's push for public amenities. The park, maybe a small visitor center. Redwood pitched it as a boon for tourism, a space where local producers could host seasonal fairs. John conceded the idea wasn't inherently bad. Eden's Hollow could benefit from a well-designed market area. But the co-op insisted Redwood Guarantee farmland wouldn't be quietly rezoned under the guise of park expansions. Redwood tentatively agreed, emphasizing the need for a mutually beneficial partnership. John sensed Redwood's main interest lay in branding the site, but for now, they left exact details for future sessions. When they adjourned, the afternoon sun angled low across the library windows. Andrea rubbed her temples, Mabel leaned back in her chair, exhausted, and Mr. Chen double-checked that all the changes they'd discussed were recorded. Redwood's group collected their materials with polite smiles. Montgomery expressed guarded satisfaction. "We've made progress, though there's plenty left to finalize. We'll set another meeting for 2 weeks from now?" John nodded. "Yes, our community needs time to digest these changes and confirm our positions. We'll be in touch." Stepping outside, John blinked in the bright light, feeling a headache throb behind his eyes. Mabel put a gentle hand on his arm. "You did well," she murmured. "You all did. Redwood didn't steamroll us." He nodded, grateful. Still, a niggle of apprehension gnawed at him. Redwood's concessions might crumble if enough farmers accepted private buyouts. Plus, Redwood's talk of not preventing legitimate deals left John wondering what Redwood might classify as legitimate. He turned to Lloyd, who promised to draft a summary of today's negotiations, ensuring Redwood's verbal agreements got locked into text form. Over the next few days, the co-op held yet another public meeting, this time more informal, in the orchard under a large oak tree. Dozens of chairs were set up, and folks brought potluck dishes to share. Children ran around, chasing one another between fruit trees heavy with near-ripe peaches, while the adults formed a loose circle of conversation. John explained the latest developments: Redwood's partial acceptance of the orchard buffer, agreement to consider farmland rules for non-co-op sellers, and willingness to discuss public amenities. Andrea described Redwood's pressure tactics, reminding everyone that no one should sign anything with Redwood without a thorough review. The reaction was mixed. Some younger farmers and local shopkeepers thought Redwood's willingness to negotiate signaled a positive future for the town's economy. Others, especially the older generation, worried that Redwood was simply biding time. Mrs. Carter, seated on a folding chair, coughed and then spoke her mind. "Companies like Redwood are patient hunters. They'll wait for us to slip up. Don't let your guard down just because they're playing nice." Her words earned nods from Wallace and a few others who trusted Redwood's motives the least. One bright spot emerged from the orchard meeting: the idea of hosting a harvest festival, inviting journalists and visitors to see how Eden's Hollow maintained its heritage. The co-op hoped showcasing the vibrant farming community might galvanize outside support and remind Redwood it had an audience watching. John felt it was a clever step, reminiscent of Mara's original article. If Redwood saw that the story of Eden's Hollow drew public interest, they might be more careful about betraying the co-op agreement. As the Harvest Festival planning took shape, word filtered through the county about how Eden's Hollow was standing up for itself. Nearby towns offered moral support, some sending volunteers to help with festival logistics. Andrea contacted Mara, updating her on the new developments. Mara responded enthusiastically, promising to feature Eden's Hollow again in a follow-up piece. She hinted that the story of a small town negotiating farmland protections with a major developer might capture national attention, especially as discussions around sustainable agriculture grew louder. John felt a swirl of hope. Perhaps the more people knew about Eden's Hollow, the less likely Redwood could twist the narrative. But Redwood didn't relent. One afternoon, Andrea discovered a sophisticated online ad campaign touting Redwood's cooperative approach in Eden's Hollow, painting a rosy picture of their prospective park and commercial improvements. The ads implied Redwood was helping a sleepy farm community modernize, barely mentioning EPP. John sighed in frustration. "They're spinning this so it seems like everything is already settled," he told Mr. Chen, who frowned at the manipulation. All the more reason, John realized, for the co-op to double down on transparency. If Redwood was shaping perceptions, Eden's Hollow needed to set the record straight. So John penned a letter to the editor of the county newspaper, clarifying the ongoing negotiations. He emphasized that farmland preservation was not optional, that Redwood's proposals were still under review, and that the co-op was determined to protect Eden's Hollow's heritage above all else. Several neighbors wrote supportive letters too, while Andrea shared digital versions on social media. Their stance: Redwood's involvement could be a boon, but only if farmland, community input, and local values were honored. As the next official task force session neared, John sensed an air of cautious unity weaving through the town. People continued checking in on one another, ensuring no one was misled or pressured by Redwood. The orchard blossomed with late summer vibrance. The co-op's seeds thrived in well-tended fields, and the prospects of a successful harvest festival grew stronger by the day. And though John worried privately about Redwood's deeper corporate strategies, he felt a steadfast resolve emanating from his neighbors. Not long ago, Eden's Hollow was just a quiet farmland, where a traveler's flat tire sparked a single act of kindness. Now it was a community galvanized by shared purpose, crafting an agreement that might become a model for small towns everywhere. Each passing day brought them closer to a final showdown. Would Redwood sign épée in full, embracing true farmland protection, or would they find loopholes to exploit? Only time would tell, and John intended to be ready, fueled by faith in the land and the people who called it home. The Harvest Festival arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, transforming Eden's Hollow into a swirl of music, laughter, and vibrant displays of the town's agricultural bounty. Rows of stalls dotted the edge of Mabel's orchard, each one laden with fresh produce, homemade jams, and baked goods. Families wandered between the tables, sampling peach cobbler or admiring clusters of sunflowers taller than a grown man. A modest stage at the orchard's center showcased local musicians performing lively folk tunes, their melodies riding the gentle breeze. Children chased one another through rows of apple trees, squealing with delight at the freedom of open space. For one day at least, Redwood's negotiations and the anxiety of looming changes receded behind the festival's festive atmosphere. Amid the celebrating, John Markham stood near a banner that read, "Eden's Hollow, where farms and friends flourish." He tried to fully absorb the scene, the orchard's leaves trembling in a golden-green shimmer, neighbors greeting one another with easy smiles, and the hum of a community that felt more united than ever. Andrea bustled by, arms laden with pamphlets explaining the co-op's mission, determined to share updates with any curious visitor. Mr. Chen paused to adjust a large map pinned to a board, pointing out farmland boundaries the EHPPA aimed to safeguard. Mabel, flushed with joy, urged festival goers to taste her orchard's newest peach variety, sweet as sunshine. Not half an hour into the festivities, Bryce Montgomery arrived with a small Redwood entourage in tow. They kept a low profile at first, strolling casually among the booths, sampling local honey and sipping lemonade. Their polished attire set them apart from the townsfolk in jeans and straw hats, yet they wore pleasant smiles, exchanging polite nods. Eventually, Montgomery approached John near the orchard stage, inclining his head in greeting. "We couldn't miss this event," he said, voice cordial. "I hear it's the heartbeat of Eden's Hollow." John returned a measured smile, shoulders taut. "We're proud of this place," he replied. "It's why we protect it so fiercely." Soon after, Redwood's corporate lawyer, Simon, drifted toward the co-op's booth, scanning the farmland map displayed there. Andrea calmly explained each color-coded area, underscoring how ICHPA would preserve orchards, grazing fields, and future farmland expansions. Simon asked cautious questions, referencing Redwood's latest proposals for the buffer zone. Andrea noted that they'd need final sign-off from the entire co-op membership, not just a handful of negotiators. Meanwhile, Talia quietly jotted observations in her notepad, occasionally peeking over at Montgomery, who wandered past lines of fruit crates. Late in the afternoon, Lloyd, the co-op's attorney, arrived with a folder tucked under his arm. He caught John's eye, motioning him aside. They slipped behind Mabel's largest peach stand, seeking a patch of quiet away from the crowds. Lloyd flipped open the folder, revealing a freshly printed document bearing Redwood's letterhead. "I just received this from Redwood's team," he explained, tapping the top page. "It's a revised version of the Farmland Protection Clause and buyout policy we've been debating. They want you to review it today." John's brow furrowed. "During the festival?" he asked. Lloyd shrugged. "They probably think the upbeat atmosphere will pressure you to say yes. I've skimmed it. They've accepted more of the co-op's points than before, but it's still missing firm language on orchard boundaries." John exhaled slowly, scanning the text. Redwood offered to limit commercial building to a narrower corridor near the future highway ramp, pledged to consult the co-op before finalizing any buyouts, and even mentioned a farmland preservation fund for 5 years. However, orchard lines remained vaguely described, and Redwood insisted on a clause that let them reevaluate farmland designations if the orchard's production diminished. John found that last condition unsettling. It could allow Redwood to claim orchard land if future yields dropped or if ownership changed. He refolded the pages, jaw tight. "We can't sign this as is," he muttered. Lloyd nodded. "We need Redwood to remove that orchard loophole. Otherwise, they could maneuver around it whenever yields dip." Determined to address it at once, John and Lloyd located Montgomery near the orchard's edge, where Redwood reps sampled fresh cider. Politely but firmly, John explained the orchard clause was unacceptable. Montgomery exchanged a glance with Talia and Simon, who arrived moments later and attempted a reassuring smile. "We only included that to protect Redwood in extreme circumstances," Montgomery offered. "If the orchard stops producing altogether, Redwood shouldn't be punished." Lloyd's eyes narrowed. "That's not how farmland works. Crop yields can fluctuate. We can't let Redwood seize orchard land due to a bad season." A small crowd formed, curious about this tense exchange. Mabel hovered on the periphery, apprehension etched across her face. Montgomery hesitated, perhaps noting the onlookers. At last, he conceded. "We can alter that language. Our main priority is the corridor near the ramp, not orchard parcels. If that clause is the only barrier, Redwood will remove it." The tension in John's chest eased slightly. "Thank you," he managed. "Then we might be close to a final agreement." A ripple of relief seemed to pass through the orchard. People resumed enjoying the festival's offerings, though some kept a cautious eye on Redwood's team. John retreated to the co-op booth, where Andrea and Mr. Chen were busy answering questions from visiting journalists. Word had spread that a reporter from Mara's publication was present, capturing the festival's sights and collecting quotes. John marveled at how far they'd come since Mara first rolled onto his farm with a flat tire. Now, Eden's Hollow was a symbol of rural resilience, the co-op forging alliances to stand against unchecked corporate expansion. In the early evening, the festival reached its apex. A short ceremony on the makeshift stage, celebrating Eden's Hollow's long-standing heritage. Mabel introduced local folks who'd farmed for decades, from Mrs. Carter to Wallace and beyond. Then she invited John to speak, joking that he was the reason we're all here after all. Cheeks burning, John stepped up, scanning the gathered crowd. Neighbors, redwood suits, reporters, and the everyday hustle of a small-town festival. He cleared his throat. This orchard stands because generations believed land is more than a resource. It's a home, John began. When a traveler named Mara needed help, I had no idea it would spark a chain of events uniting us under the co-op. We're not naive. We know the world changes. But if we stand together, we can shape that change instead of bowing to it. Redwood is here tonight, and we've spent many hours negotiating. Maybe we'll find a compromise that benefits everyone, but only if farmland remains farmland, if we remain true to who we are. A low, warm applause followed, punctuated by cheers from the younger farmers. Montgomery, standing near the back, offered a polite clap while maintaining a measured expression. John stepped down, relieved the moment was over. Mabel gave him a quick hug. "Well said," she whispered, eyes shining. As dusk deepened into a velvety sky, strings of lanterns illuminated the orchard paths. People lingered, savoring the last of the music. Redwood's group huddled near the co-op booth, quietly discussing final details with Lloyd. By the time the festival wrapped up, Redwood handed John a newly edited draft of the farmland clause, excising the orchard loophole. "We'll get you a formal, revised document next week," Montgomery said, sounding almost genuine. "If everyone's satisfied, Redwood's board will sign off, and we can proceed." John studied the brief changes, heart pounding with cautious optimism. It seemed Redwood was stepping back from its greatest intrusion, focusing on that narrower commercial strip. He glimpsed Mabel nearby, wiping tears of relief. She'd worried so much about orchard lines. This update, though not legally final, hinted Redwood might truly accommodate the co-op's demands. No doubt Redwood still aimed to profit from the highway project, but perhaps their corporate pragmatism had led them to see that a pitched battle with Eden's Hollow would be costly in public relations, especially with national media taking interest. For a moment, John allowed himself to envision a future where farmland thrived beside a carefully managed commercial hub, where Redwood's involvement bolstered distribution routes without devouring the land. He saw orchard rows continuing to yield sweet fruit for decades, children growing up in a community that balanced progress with preservation. The thought stirred hope in his chest. As Redwood's SUV rolled away under the starlit sky, the last festival goers helped clean up tables and fold chairs. Andrea and Mr. Chen joked about adding negotiator to their resumes. Mabel gazed at the orchard, shadows dancing in the lantern light. Lloyd promised to finalize the new language soon, ensuring Redwood's promises found a firm legal footing. Still, John warned everyone that Redwood's final signature wasn't guaranteed until the ink dried on EHPA. Yet the festival ended with a sense of triumph. People parted, exchanging hugs and promises to gather again for the final signing. In hushed conversations, they marveled at Redwood's decision to remove the orchard loophole, speculating that the co-op's unity and outside attention had forced Redwood's hand. By midnight, the orchard stood quiet and dark, littered with footprints and traces of confetti, a testament to the day's celebration. Driving home, John felt a calm resolve. Redwood might finalize the deal, or they might still wriggle out. Either way, Eden's Hollow had proven it wouldn't be bulldozed by corporate ambition. The farmland, orchard, and communal spirit were stronger now than they'd ever been. As he climbed his porch steps, he remembered the traveler who'd needed help with a flat tire and how every small act of kindness could grow beyond measure. With Ishpa near completion, he believed Eden's Hollow had found a path forward that honored both tradition and progress, ensuring that future harvests could flourish on land tended by hands of hope.